Hey, geographers, coming at you live from the Lincoln Forum in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. We just had our big fancy opening night dinner. We got to hear two historians speak on Lincoln and generals of the war. They introduced your favorite teacher here. I'm being one of the teacher scholarship winners tonight, so that was nice. Now I'm drinking my watered down cranberry juice and seltzer. And got changed and am going to go over some culture with you guys. All right, so this is the introduction for Unit 3 on culture. So I don't know if you guys recognize this view. This is a view from South Street in Philadelphia of, in my opinion, the best place to get cheesesteaks. And that's the newly reopened Jim's Steaks. All right, so what do we need to know about culture? Well, let's first reflect on what it is. It is the shared practices, technology, and attitudes that are transferred by a society, right? So common things that a people will share in that society. It is the sum of the human experience by a group of people living together, right? So how is this group's experience in life different than another group's experience in life? All those things added up is what culture is. It's what makes up your daily lives. It might be what makes up things that you may do once a year, like maybe you go to the Boonton as a fireman's festival, maybe you go on the rides, maybe you eat the clams, right? Things like that would be part of a local culture here, right? There's different types of culture or different characteristics within a culture. We have material culture and non-material culture. Pretty simple concept. Material culture is basically anything you can put a price tag to, something that has monetary value. It might be the cars people drive, or what do they use for transportation? The homes they live in, the clothing, the Stanley cups that they purchase, or whatever it is now, right? Um, Things like that. Non-material culture is things that you can't really put that price tag on. It could be ideas, right? Values that are important, um, certain traditions, certain things that give you a certain feeling or a certain sense of community. We also wanted to know, well, and be able to differentiate between folk culture and pop culture. All right, pop culture doesn't mean you have to think of Taylor Swift, and folk culture doesn't mean you have to think of like some guy in a guitar in the country, right? So folk culture is just local culture, something that's experienced by either a subculture or just people in a certain specific area. So if you are from Boonton or even Lincoln Park, you might know of Don's Sandwich Shop, and it might hold a special place in your heart, right? It's part of the community. If you're local to Philadelphia, you might use the word jawn. You might never have heard of that word jawn before, but if you live in Philadelphia, that might be a word, right? So even like certain dialect or slang that's unique to a certain area. Um, Taylor ham or pork roll, right? That's part of a local culture. Now, notice how with folk culture, right, McDonald's, which is pop culture, was trying to target local culture, was trying to target folk culture to, make more money. So it's an interesting blend, actually, of pop culture and folk culture. Because pop culture is something that spreads beyond regions. It might be, beyond just a town. It might be across several states. It may even become global. So, you may be people from like all across the world and doing some similar TikTok dance. All right. I've seen you guys do it in the hallway. All right. That is part of pop culture. It's something that spreads beyond regions, beyond borders. Now let's look at some shared, oops, oops, go the wrong way. Oh, and if anyone noticed, that was the Rockaway Mall. If you guys go to Rockaway Mall at all. And the Starbucks there, right? Now, is Starbucks part of our culture? Or is it not? You tell me. All right, now shared practices. Shared practices are things that in a culture that are commonly done, right? That are shared by many people of that community. Maybe not all, right? So, for example, birth rituals, right? What do people do when people are born? Are there baby showers? Are certain things done? This is an image of a gender reveal gone awry. We like to see in the news now all these gender reveals where they're like starting forest fires or killing people, even doing these awful things, right? Gender reveals were not a thing. Like, I mean, maybe people found out, but they didn't have these big extravagant things years ago. They were not parties, they were not reveals. So this is like a more recent trend um, uh, as far as shared practices and culture in this area go. Death rituals, right? If you go to a cemetery, you may see certain characteristics of a culture. What are the words on the tombstones? If you look at year by year, is there artwork? Um, what is the shape of the tombstone? Does that reflect anything? Um, what about a memorial, right? So all these sorts of things reflect shared practices. Weddings, they're different culture by culture. Education, right? We live in a country where public education is basically mandatory with few exceptions until you're 16. That wasn't always part of our culture. That isn't part of cultures, universally throughout the world. So shared practices, some sort of tradition that people have somewhat in common, right? Might not be completely. All right, technology. Do you notice this is the Boonton train station? All right, so how do members communicate in a culture? Right now, it could be like actually with the spoken word or with physical gestures, right? Like hey, right, right. But also technology can be used for that. I am communicating to you guys via a laptop, which you're getting via your Chromebook or your phone using Wi-Fi, right? Using all these different technologies. Here I am in Pennsylvania, so you have this video for class on Monday. Um, is it through text messaging? Do you guys communicate more through emojis, right, than text? It could be communicating through Snapchats, right? Apparently, people do that, right? So that could all be included in that. Also, how do people move, right? Think of Hans Rosling. Are people moving by their walking? They're taking a bike. They're taking a car. They're taking a plane, right? They're taking a train, right? Lots of people in this area taking the train to commute is a part of a larger culture that doesn't exist in all parts of the world, doesn't even exist in all parts of our country. I'll give you an example here. Look at that blue part of this circle. If this is all the people in the United States that commute to work by train, the New York metro area is almost half of that, right? Down south, very few people commute to work by train, right? Um, so what might be commonplace here is not so much a commonplace part of our culture in other parts of the United States. Attitudes and behaviors are included in culture as well. So think of things like age of maturity. My sophomores in US1 this week, last week, they read about children of the revolution. Some of these children were fighting in the revolution or even leading troops in the revolution. By today's terms, chronologically, they were children, but they were considered mature enough to do that at that time, right? They wouldn't be by today's standards. I think I mentioned to you guys that I taught years ago a student who was a war veteran from Sierra Leone, right? So in other cultures, people that age are considered more mature, or that the adolescence doesn't even exist. You go from like child to adult, right? So that is an attitude or behavior that differs by cultures. Gender roles, that could be something that differs by cultures as well. Keep in mind, that doesn't mean any part of a culture has to agree 100%. Very rarely does this ever happen for any of these factors, for any of these attitudes, or any of these behaviors. But what are the overarching themes, right? So today, you may see here some child soldiers in some countries. Above, those are female soldiers from Israel. There are some countries that still don't allow females in the military. Not as many these days, but they do exist, right? So those are attitudes and behaviors that are a part of a culture. They can be because it's political rules or just social norms. It could be a combination of these things. So here's an example. There are still many countries that prevent women from working certain specific jobs, right? Whereas in the United States, you may not see many women doing construction work. Just you might not see as many men being kindergarten teachers, but that doesn't mean that there's laws that are preventing either from some. Or in some countries, there literally are similar laws like that. It could also deal with like the system of government and who's in charge. That could also deal with attitudes and behaviors as well. Now let's think of cultural traits. Okay, this sort of is a transition. It blends pretty easily. Cultural traits are elements that are developed through social interaction. So you totally you grow up seeing people do certain things, watching things on TV or on iPads. Seems like all these kids are on iPads while they're in the shopping carts these days, right? It even starts when you're in the womb. So you already start to learn language and you start to learn songs, right? There were studies years ago about babies who are born and recognize certain theme songs to TV shows that their mothers would watch while they were pregnant. So things that are just sort of passed without basically saying this is what you do, right? But you just sort of learn it and observe it. So some of this can be learned, right? Some of this you literally go to school for, or your parents try to teach you. It can be dynamic, which means this often changes, right? So a certain cultural trait you have established when you're a child might not be a same cultural trait that stays throughout, your entire lifetime, right? Different cultural traits have existed in my time as a teacher about, things we expect of students. There can also be subcultures. So even within a culture, there could be subcultures that have little different cultural traits than the culture at large. Might be, you may practice a religion that means you don't practice certain holidays, or you have different types of weddings, or you speak a different language. And often symbols are involved with this. So this is a McDonald's birthday party from the 1980s, which was a very common way in the 80s that children had birthday parties, right? McDonald's or Burger King. I doubt it broke their parents' bank like many birthday parties do for kids these days, right? And it even has the Cabbage Patch Kid, which was a cultural phenomenon of the 80s. And notice that boys had Cabbage Patch dolls, and you don't even even though gender norms have changed and over time, you don't see as many boys with dolls now. So think of all these cultural traits that this is an example of them being dynamic. All right. Patterns and processes. So once again, these things change over time. So what are some of these, right? Language. That deals with the location you are, even what you wear and can communicate language. That language gives you a context of everything that you're learning, right? Clothing, right? Well, how do what people wear reveal culture, right? So sometimes you might see a picture and you'd be like, oh, I know it's from this country based on what they're wearing. But it's not always that. Sometimes people wear certain things because it's the weather, right? In December, I doubt the people of Maine are going to wear the same clothes of the people of Florida, right? Religion also dictates what people wear sometimes, right? Whether it's you're wearing something religious, but also certain religions have rules about what you wear on your head. You need to be fully covered. Sometimes it's just while you're in a place of worship. Sometimes it's anytime you're out of your house or even in your house. Jobs, right? If I was going to work, outside all day, I'm not going to wear the same things as if I'm inside all day. If I'm moving all day, right? So, someone who works on a farm is going to look different than someone that works in an office as far as their clothing goes. Right? Artifacts can include all sorts of things, but think of jewelry, right? Jewelry reveals parts of a culture. If you're not sure, look up the SNL skit of Jennifer Lopez wearing her hoop earrings, right? And sort of mocking New York City metro area, New Jersey people with their hoop earrings, all right? Visual art, The art you may have in your home, in a public building, can reveal about our culture. The music people listen to, the music people play, and also the way people dance, right? Think of like traditional dances or even by generational dances. Food, we all know, is a big reflection of culture as well. What people eat might be just because of the physical geography, right? Where you live, where you might be able to grow certain crops, right? If we grow a lot of cranberries in South Jersey, that might be before mass transportation, maybe that would, make mean more people there ate cranberries, right? Also, think here's an example. If you think of stir fry food, why do some cultures have stir fry? Now, think of Japan. Japan is an archipelago, does not have a lot of natural resources, right? Lots of trees cut down, so their fuel, they don't have as much fuel. So cutting meat up into smaller pieces means you need less fuel to cook the meat. So there's actually a physical geography connection to why stir fry exists where it exists, right? People also might eat based on their religion. Maybe you're Jain and you're therefore vegetarian, for example. Or maybe you're Catholic and you don't have meat on Fridays during Lent. And also local customs are persistent in food as well. Architecture, right? Think of all different types of buildings we'll look at in this unit. Sometimes it's just for aesthetics. People like the way it looks. Religion can sometimes be depicted in architecture, especially for religious buildings. What building materials are available? Do they use clay? Do they use grass? Do they use wood? Do they use stone, right? Are you going to build a building on a house or on a flat piece of land? That's going to make the building different. Also, sometimes form of government. So here's another example. This is a house from Beach Haven West, New Jersey. Why is it on stilts? Well, now they sort of have to make them on stilts because of recent hurricanes, but that's why, for flooding, right? To sort of protect your house. You're not going to see a house like this where we live. Even though like Denville has flooded a lot of times, maybe the houses along the river should do this, right? But that is an example of a cultural trait in architecture. Also, the way communities use land, right? Is this land a sacred space? Does this land have a community function? Is this area a place where a lot of people live? Is this a place with a lot of shops for economies, right? This is a long slide, but it just shows you like all the different parts of culture that we're going to start like identifying in this unit. Something to think about, how do you identify yourself, right? So sometimes if you think about that, it will also reflect how we look at different cultures. So people gain a sense of self through their culture, right? So ideally, or I don't even know if ideally is the right word, but culture impacts everyone's life, right? So think of how do you identify yourself? And this doesn't mean you have to identify yourself in one way exclusively, but if we were to ask you like where you're from or who are you, right? Would you first say you're just an American? Would you say you're from New Jersey? Would you say you're from the town? Would you first just identify yourself with what religion you are, right? Would you first identify yourself with what gender you are, right? What would be your identity and what culture is sort of shining through with that? And we're going to end with the ideas of cultural relativism and ethnocentrism. So cultural relativism is like the fuzzy, warm rainbow and unicorns idea of culture. It's a humanistic view. It's a celebration of diversity. You realize that there's many different cultures. That doesn't mean that any culture is superior than the other. Other cultures are worth learning about. They're worth understanding about. They're worth being empathetic to, and they're worth learning about, right? So I have some pictures here, right? A great part of Bhutan is being able to eat at many different food establishments that reflects different cultures. I've eaten at the Colombian bakery, right? Maybe it is the Mexican restaurant. Maybe you've had an empanada at Eric's Jamaican cuisine, right? So that's an example. If you enjoy that, and that's cultural relativism, right? So someone like here, might they say, "Hey, do you want some fried crickets?" You'd be like, "Well, let me tell me why." Right? Instead of just going, "Ew, that's gross. You're disgusting." You might not want to do it, but at least sort of like keep an open mind. Ethnocentrism is quite the opposite. This is when you judge another culture by the standards of your own culture. And when you do that, you're basically thinking that your culture is the superior one, which doesn't say you can't have pride in your culture, right? Have pride being an American, right? But that doesn't mean that even with having that pride, that you're like, it's your way is the only right way to do things. So this is an example. You probably learned this in world history, the age of imperialism. You heard about the white man's burden, right? From Rudyard Kipling's poem, and this is an actual advertisement for like soap, right? That like, um, we're bringing cleanliness to these cultures. It's not to say that they didn't have their own forms of hygiene, and like they're going to be just like us now because we have the superior culture, right? So ethnocentrism can vary from simple thoughts to violence. It can be in things that seem fairly innocent. I may say a name, and it sounds foreign to many people. It's not like a Mary or a John, right? And if some people say like, well, what kind of name is that, right? That's showing ethnocentrism. You don't realize that other cultures may have different names, right? Or if you're saying like how can you eat that, right? Something, we hear the French eat horse meat. How can they do that? Well, it's a different culture, right? It doesn't mean it's necessarily unethical or immoral, right? That doesn't mean you value unethical or immoral things to not be ethnocentric. But you see what I'm saying. Xenophobia is when like you're actually have that fear of unknown things and you sort of like hate the unknown, right? So it's ethnocentrism can cross the line into causing hate, and it starts wars, it starts genocide, right? It's something we want to be mindful of. All right, I hope you're having a great time. I can't wait to go over more of these specifics about culture, look at examples, see foods people eat, see places people live, and learn more about the world with you guys. All right. In honor of Lincoln, see ya.